When the Philadelphia police came to the apartment building at 3411 Race Street at 9 a.m. on the morning of March 28, 1979, they weren't too sure what they would find. The Powelton Village district of the city was not a high-crime area. It was too collegiate for that, housing the University of Pennsylvania within and emanating a scholastic aura. Also, the person whose quarters they were just about to search was not, by the farthest stretch of the imagination, the type of individual who would commit the type of crime for which he was suspected. Stepping into the foyer as a group, the police, a mix of plainclothesmen and uniformed officers, watched quietly as their commander, Detective Michael Chitwood, pressed the caller button under the name Einhorn stenciled above it. The cops paused a moment, waiting, studying the dimness and age of the entranceway, before an electronic buzzer sounded to open the security door to the stairwell. When Chitwood, leading the entourage up the wooden steps, saw the fat man with a grizzly beard and a bathrobe staring down at them from the landing, his first thought was, "He doesn't look like an icon." But there he was, looking half asleep more than anything. The fat man with the unkempt beard, the king of the radicals, the prince of flower power, the guru of peace and love. He called himself poetically Unicorn, because the name Einhorn, a German Jewish name, means one horn. But this character was not a myth. He was very real and had created from an innocent era a flip-side world of reefers and LSD and free love. His was an innovation in the age of Aquarius, and he was the chief Aquarian in Philadelphia, at one time revered by the new generation of the 1960s. Now, as the detectives ascended the steps, this self-styled guru, considered as great as Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, wore a bathrobe stained with rust. His dirty ankles and dirtier toenails protruded from under. Coming yet closer, the detective chief thought he sensed a scratch of worry in his eyeballs. Chitwood passed him a search warrant, told him to read it, then sign it. The unicorn, he noticed, had body odor. Neighbors below Einhorn's flat had been complaining for some time that they were detecting a terrible stench coming through the floorboards, accompanied by an occasional oozing of putrid brown matter that stained their ceiling. They tried to paint it out and sanitize the smell with disinfectants, but the odor increased, and the oozing continued. When the building foreman investigated the problem, Einhorn refused to let the man check the closet from which the smell seemed to be coming. The city police got wind of this occurrence. They started wondering if maybe, just maybe, it had something to do with a body they had been unable to find for the last 18 months. That is, what might be left of Holly Maddux, Einhorn's old flame, who had disappeared one day into the ether. Holly's disappearance hadn't made sense to her family in Tyler, Texas, not from day one. She had been bright, beautiful, and bouncy, and, while not particularly overjoyed with the essentials of her life back in September 1977, she just didn't seem the kind of woman who would run off to a deserted isle or join a left-wing group of dissidents, as had Patty Hearst. But disappeared she had, Ira said back then. Went to the store and never returned. The relationship between Einhorn and his live-in girlfriend had been, to say the least, stormy over the 5 years they had been together. She had been a fresh, blue-eyed former cheerleader-turned-Bryn Mawr student-turned-women's libber when they met in a college cafe. He, being one of the politically vocal icons of the time, totally overwhelmed her at first. Physically, they were the odd couple. Einhorn, a hulk of a man, a behemoth at 5'10" and 230 pounds, wore a prophet's beard, went unbathed, and carried a gut that stretched the belly of his undersized tie-dyed T-shirts to the limit. She, in contrast, bore the carriage of a ballerina, gliding as if on air, petite and wispy, of translucent skin and tiny movements. Her sister later compared her to a Michelle Pfeiffer. Her smile glowed and brought a ray of sunshine that totally drew attention away from the bear that shuffled beside her. But the beauty found the beast magnetic and his genius captivating. Her ultra-conservative, church-going parents were aghast when she took up with the paunchy, hairy liberal who defied the social standards, but they coolly accepted it. She was already 25 years old when they decided to share the Race Street apartment and beyond their control. Maddux had a younger brother and 3 younger sisters. When she brought Ira home to Texas to meet the family, they were horrified, reported Time magazine. Like a caveman, Ira began eating ravenously. While the family said grace, he scratched and clawed at his poison ivy blisters, and he treated Holly as if she were his personal maiden. Of the visit, Holly's sister Elizabeth recalled, "We concluded that he basically came down there to try and promote a rift between Holly and my father." As the couple's lives together progressed, Holly slowly realized that he was self-centered, abusive, and even brutal. Strange for someone who hated Vietnam for its violence and preached the essence of peace in man and matter. Eventually, several months after the supper in Texas, Holly confessed to Elizabeth that she wanted out of the mess. Ira had a dark side at odds with the values he professed, Newsweek asserted. It ranged from his overpowering ego to his domineering and sometimes violent relationships with women. Yet he never paid a price for this. During the live and let live 1960s, Ira was almost never called on to answer for his behavior. Before he met Holly, there were episodes in which he attacked women who had rejected him. He strangled one of them until she fell unconscious. Several years later, after hitting a second woman over the head with a Coke bottle, he wrote in his journal, "Violence always marks the end of a relationship." Maybe Holly remained with him so long because she was afraid to leave, friends and family conjectured. He was known, after all, to have threatened her. Only slowly did Holly realize that she could overcome Ira's dominating presence, Newsweek continued. She decided to leave him, but Ira was in a frenzy at the idea of losing her. Holly moved to New York. There she began a romance with a man named Saul Lapidus, who was kind and gentle to her and represented every warm emotion that the unicorn lacked. Holly called Einhorn from Lapidus's apartment to sever their relationship once and for all. When he heard this and understood that there would be no compromise this time, he raged. "Get over here now or I'll throw your personal belongings onto the street," he ranted. She left for Philadelphia immediately. That was September 9th, 1977. She was never seen again. Not long afterward, the Maddux family became apprehensive. Mrs. Maddux's birthday had come and gone without a salutation from the usually considerate Holly. Not only was this the first time she had forgotten any relative's birthday, but she had never gone more than 2 weeks without telephoning. When they called the Einhorn apartment to speak to her, no one ever answered the phone. Finally, they notified the Philadelphia police. Ira was questioned, but with a shrug, explained that she had gone out a couple of weeks previously to the neighborhood co-op to buy some tofu and sprouts. "I never saw her again," he said, adding that they had been having relationship problems, and he assumed she had finally made good on her promises to leave him. Most likely because he was the unicorn, cult hero, and activist, the police walked away, without a doubtful glance backward. Dissatisfied, the Madduxes hired 2 private detectives, former FBI agents, to investigate their daughter's disappearance. They sought out and interviewed dozens of people who knew both Holly and Einhorn, as well as Einhorn himself, whom they found uncooperative. But then they uncovered a practical lead. 2 Einhorn female associates stated that a couple of days after Holly's disappearance, the unicorn had sought their help in disposing of a trunk that contained what he referred to as secret documents. The friends never helped him, and as far as they were concerned, the trunk was probably still in Einhorn's possession. Now the Philadelphia police grew interested. In the meantime, the unicorn had continued his normal existence, no longer rallying crowds of bell-bottoms and bandanas, but reworking his 1960s doctrines into the post-dissident climate. He accepted speaking tours, taught alternative education classes, and convinced the pinstriped business world of the Fortune 500s that their money could save the Earth through ecological awareness. Einhorn became a New Age networker with CEOs, sold them blueprints of the future, exclaims Marilyn Lois Polak in the WorldNet Daily. He launched Philadelphia's Earth Day celebration, ran for mayor of Philadelphia as a self-proclaimed planetary enzyme, a catalyst for global change. Newsweek added, his unmistakable wild laugh could often be heard at his favorite restaurant, La Terrace, near his alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, as he mesmerized some guy in a suit with ideas from the edge, anything from quantum physics to New Age management theories. And between it all, he won a semester-long fellowship to Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. But on March 28, 1979, his world changed. Detectives put together the strangely shaped little pieces of the unicorn's puzzle. A missing girlfriend who wanted out, a trunk with secret documents he needed to get rid of, a lackluster team-playing effort with Maddux's private investigators, unexplainable but rancid brown liquid seeping through his floorboards, his refusal to let the janitor examine the source of the smell. Detective Chitwood and his men explored Einhorn's small apartment rather hastily, going through general motions, but they were really building up for what they all felt was the denouement. The closet. The closet. The one he kept padlocked and for which he lost the key. The closet off the screened-in porch that seemed to breed odd odors. As Chitwood stepped before the door, he too noticed the smell, a pungent smell, a rotting smell. While a photographer recorded each of his moves for legal purposes, Chitwood snapped the lock with a crowbar. The closet was about 3 feet deep, and the camera flashed again and again as the detective yanked from the shelves one damaging piece of evidence after another. Holly's suitcase, packed. Her purse, full, including her driver's license and social security card. Boxes and bags of women's clothing and effects. Then he saw what he came for. Michael Chitwood took off his suit jacket. He was now ready to open the trunk, wrote Stephen Levy in The Unicorn's Secret. Chitwood opened the 2 side latches, then the hasp-type latch in the middle. He opened the trunk. The foul odor Chitwood noticed was now much stronger. He asked one of his men for a pair of rubber gloves. Newspapers dating from September 15, 1977 and earlier covered what was underneath. A second layer consisted of packing styrofoam and plastic Sears bags crumpled up. He slowly scooped the foam aside, Levy goes on. After 3 scoops, he saw something. At first, he could not make out what it was because it was so wrinkled and tough. But then he saw the shape of it, wrist, palm, and 5 fingers, curled and frozen in their stillness. He dug just a little deeper, following the shriveled, rawhide-like hand down the wrist, and saw an arm, still clothed in a flannel shirt. And he had seen enough. He turned to the unicorn, whose expression was still blasé. "It looks like we've found Holly's body," he said. The unicorn shrugged with indifference, as he did in the good old days when the campus police caught him puffing on a joint. "You found what you found." Philadelphia awoke on March 29, 1979, unfurled its morning papers, and gawked. The headline brought disbelief and ended an era with a thud. In huge black letters across the upper third of the Philadelphia Inquirer's front page, hippie guru held in trunk slaying, Mr. Peace, Mr. Flower Power, Mr. Save the Earth. A killer. In every other metropolitan city, the disaster at the nuclear plant called 3 Mile Island dominated the news. But not so in the city of brotherly love. Who cared about something so remote as a radioactive leak when in town its own beloved unicorn was about to be dehorned? The accompanying story detailed the disappearance of Helen Holly Maddux and her discovery in a steamer trunk in the unicorn's closet. Her skull had been smashed in several places, either with a blunt object or by force against the wall or floor. Final autopsy results would determine that. and she was literally stuffed into a box that was large enough for maybe a child half her size. From the contortion of the body and the evidence of an upraised arm, detectives believed she was probably buried while still alive, although half-conscious, and died trying to claw her way out. After 18 months, her mummified remains weighed only 37 pounds. Ira the unicorn was crying foul, claiming that he had been framed. The whole thing was a setup, Einhorn assured followers, wrote Times columnist Steve Lopez. Through his anti-war research, and with contacts that extended beyond the Iron Curtain, he simply knew too much about weapons development, psychic research, and global conspiracies. Maddux was murdered to discredit him. The CIA, the KGB, who knew? The most damning evidence against him was also the most obvious proof of his innocence. Would a man as smart as he murder his girlfriend and keep the evidence at his bedside? Then came the bail hearing on April 3rd. If one didn't know better, one would assume that they were trying St. Peter for all the reputation-boosting testimony that was communicated from corporate executives, columnists, a minister, and other high-caliber profiles. There simply was not enough time for all their praises, noted Stephen Levy in The Unicorn's Secret. He is of good, excellent character, exclaimed a corporate attorney with whom he had worked on a fundraising project. He has the highest level of integrity, remarked an Ivy League lecturer, a man who is compassionate and loving. A former Wall Street Journal economist described his reputation as the finest, and an Episcopalian minister judged him as a man of nonviolence. But to prove that every side has two stories, the prosecution brought in its witnesses who told of the other, non-public Ira Einhorn. For example, those two women who were assaulted when trying to end their affairs with the unicorn. The ladies were asked to help him throw the trunk into the river. The private detectives hired by the Madduxes spoke of his unwillingness to cooperate. Others called him distrustful, rarely loyal, a far-flung egomaniac. Nevertheless, even though it was unheard of for alleged murderers awaiting trial to be granted a release on bail, Ira Einhorn was granted bail. His attorney, former district attorney and soon-to-be U.S. Senator Arlen Specter, had engineered a miracle. Says Lopez, bail was set at a staggeringly low $40,000, only $4,000 of it needed to walk free. It was paid by Barbara Bronfman, a Montreal socialite who had married into the Seagram distillery family and met Einhorn through a common interest in the paranormal. Over the next year, awaiting trial, the unicorn did several things. Back on the streets, he complained about his hurt image, that friends who used to say hello now averted their eyes when they passed. Sulking, he told a friend, "I can't be Ira Einhorn anymore." And he bragged. He was going to prove in court that he was innocent, damn it anyway, and was framed by the CIA or FBI or somebody. It could have been a number of people who wanted him and his two truthful ideas silenced. Oh, and he did something else too. In January 1981, at the threshold of his trial, the stalwart, the harmless hero, the injured icon, the mistreated miracle man left. He beat it out of town. He beat it out of the country. For 4 years, Ira Einhorn vanished. His existence seemed as questionable as that of the one-horned, winged animal after which he named himself. But by late 1985, a determined sleuth back in Philadelphia had traced him to Ireland. There he had taken a new name, Ben Moore. By the time that detectives arrived, however, Ben Moore was gone. Thus begins one of the most dramatic and longest pursuits of a fugitive in the history of crime. And surely one with the strangest conclusion. Engineering the manhunt was Assistant District Attorney Richard DiBenedetto, age 49. His large office in downtown Philadelphia had shrunk behind a wall of cardboard boxes over the past several years, crates all containing information on his prey, his Einhorn files. The inventory included the more than 60 handwritten journals that the unicorn left behind. Each journal contained more than 125 pages, and DiBenedetto, could recite every page. Time explained. Although he sat at his desk, he worked from inside Einhorn's mind, having studied every word. Among the lines that stopped him, revealing the cold depths of Einhorn's darkness, were these: sadism, sounds nice. Run it over your tongue. Contemplate with joy the pains of others. To beat a woman. What joy! The violence that flowed through my being tonight could result in the murder of that which I love so deeply. De Benedetto drew up from everywhere a long list of names that were, at any given time in Einhorn's past, friends, colleagues, and supporters. The list included celebrities and laymen, rich and poor, people who may innocently shelter and abet Einhorn, not realizing that he was a wanted criminal. Among the potpourri were rock stars like Peter Gabriel and the world-famous Israeli psychic Uri Geller. I knew he liked to play a game called Go. It's an ancient Oriental game, and I found out through the internet where the Go clubs were located throughout Europe, Di Benedetto explained. One was in Dublin, Ireland, one of Einhorn's first stops. He and his girlfriend rented an apartment from a Trinity College professor named Dennis Ware. When Ware visited friends in Chicago in 1981, he told them about this mysterious character named Einhorn. His friends thought the name rang a bell. They called the newspapers and got the full story. But when Ware notified the Irish police back home, they could not act. No extradition papers were in effect, so all that Ware could do was evict him. The unicorn, however, got the hint and fled Dublin. From there, Einhorn traveled extensively throughout the United Kingdom, always one step ahead of De Benedetto's investigators. By now, Professor Ware had spoken with De Benedetto and realized who Einhorn was and why the Americans wanted him. So when he again came across him in the Trinity College cafeteria, he immediately phoned De Benedetto. Extradition papers were issued, and the Irish police moved in. But the elusive creature, the unicorn, was gone again. This time he crossed the English Channel to blend in among the bohemian culture of continental Europe. De Benedetto suspected that someone was financing Einhorn's travels all these years, possibly Barbara Bronfman, who had paid his bail after his arrest. The investigator questioned her in 1988, and yes, she finally admitted she had been. But she had just finished reading The Unicorn's Secret by Stephen Levy, and learned some things about Einhorn she had never known. She now truly believed he was guilty. Bronfman revealed his whereabouts, giving De Benedetto the Stockholm, Sweden address where he was currently renting. When the authorities arrived, he was gone. The woman who lived at the address gave her name as Annika Floden and said she was the building's landlady. She had had no idea Einhorn was a fugitive. He had used the name Ben Moore and seemed very pleasant. Where he had gone, she couldn't say. The Philadelphia DA smelled fish. This landlady bore an uncanny resemblance to Holly Maddux, and more so, was exceedingly wealthy. The kind of female that a penniless escapee and opportunist would seduce. He believed they were having an affair. De Benedetto, an armchair student of military strategy, waited for them to make a wrong move. The coup worked. When Floden disappeared from Stockholm, he was sure it was to meet up with the unicorn somewhere. To track her, he notified his Interpol contacts and had them run her Swedish Social Security number through records. Word soon came that Annika Floden Malin, age 46, had applied for a French driver's license. It appeared she had relocated to France and married Einhorn, who changed his name to Malin. The law was closing in. After 16 years of stakeouts and near misses, Di Benedetto traced Einhorn Malin to the remote French village of Champagne-Mouton in France's sumptuous wine country, melting without a murmur in the mountain scenery. Columnist Steve Lopez wrote, Eugene Malin lived like a king in the south of France, sharing a tile-roofed farmhouse with his strawberry-blonde Swedish wife. He read books, put idle thoughts on paper, and played in a bridge club every Friday. She baked bread, tended the garden, and strolled into the nearby village on market day, tall and delicate, a sight so fair the mayor's tired old heart would stir. The Gold Creek met the Silver Creek near the Mallon's acreage, and all around the gentlest breeze would set fields of sunflowers ablaze with waves of golden light. Just after sunrise on June 18, 1997, Flodden answered a series of knocks on her front door. More than the scent of morning dew filled the open doorway this morning. The police, their 9mm Berettas drawn, nudged her aside and vaulted the staircase that led to the loft. There they found Monsieur Mallon. Forcing him to dress, they then hustled him in handcuffs to the ages-old constabulary in town, where he denied he was Einhorn. But a 2-hour auto ride to Gradignan prison in Bordeaux proved that he really was. Time wrote, though his physical appearance had changed dramatically in his years on the lam, he had lost 50 pounds and whacked off his long hair and beard. His fingerprints hadn't. But while Di Benedetto and many others rejoiced, they were soon to find out that the celebration was quite premature. The unicorn's luck had not run out. He would beat the extradition charges. Einhorn's lawyers staged an unexpected and brilliant counterattack, one that kept American justice wounded and wanting. Ted Simon, an enigmatic attorney and an expert in international law, took charge of the defense team in Paris and Bordeaux, citing a particular loophole in the prosecution's extradition request. According to established rules of the European Convention on Human Rights, no alleged criminal was ever to be tried in absentia, that is, without his or her actual presence in court. In 1993, the Philadelphian judicial system conducted such a trial, an acceptable American procedure after a suspect flees the country and refuses to return after an ordained period of time. The trial was held as a normal murder trial, with a judge, a full jury, witnesses, evidence, and a legal team, but without the suspect or a defense counsel. At its conclusion, Einhorn had been convicted and given the death sentence for the murder of Holly Maddux, the said verdict to be carried out upon his return to America. French custom finds such a process unfathomable. The fact that Einhorn was tried in absentia goes against the French code of honor. The fact that he was given the death sentence without legal representation is considered brutal. Furthermore, France does not condone capital punishment. Prosecutors argued that the unicorn had been given a chance to respond, but failed to do so. To the French courts, however, that was not good enough. All that mattered was that Einhorn was convicted without the actuality of his voice in defense. In December 1997, Einhorn walked out of court a free man once more. Stephen Levy, author of The Unicorn's Secret, was one of the many people affronted by the decision. Suddenly, Judge Michael Arrighi, sitting in front a painting of the crucified Jesus in a Bordeaux courtroom, is decreeing that Einhorn soit mis en liberté, that he be set free. An exultant, blue-jeaned 57-year-old killer, looking none the worse from 6 months at Gradignan prison, is breaking out in a gap-toothed grin, hugging the wealthy Swedish wife he'd picked up during his travels. And then he is motoring off to his home, a charming old converted mill on a bucolic lane outside the medieval village of Champagne-Mouton. The Maddux family, he says, found the news devastating. Philadelphia prosecutor Joel Rosen was outraged and proclaimed his disgust at the French courts for not releasing into his custody an American citizen who killed another American citizen on American soil. District Attorney Lynn Abraham summarized the decision with the phrase, "He is getting away with murder." As for Richard Di Benedetto, who worked so hard and so long to bring the unicorn home, it was a nasty blow to him and what it meant for the American legal system. Back home, the Pennsylvania General Assembly had no choice but to pass legislation that granted a previously tried and condemned man a whole new trial and, at least in Einhorn's case, a trial that would promise no enactment of the death penalty. The prosecution returned to France to proffer their revisions in January 1998. and after months of bantering, an extradition hearing was granted. The French added one more component to the American offer. If Einhorn lost his bid to stay in France, he had the right to appeal. The U.S. grudgingly complied, and Einhorn was given the news when he was arrested. But, incredible as it may seem, French officials released him on bail to await the hearing. More incredibly, he didn't light out. The judges explained that Einhorn could remain free in France until the long process leading to an actual extradition, a process his attorney said could take up to 2 years, was completed, says the Philadelphia Inquirer. The court was readied, and all the fanfare that would go with it. A hearing in front of the Cour de Cassation was scheduled for May 27, 1999, at the Palais de Justice. The press sat on the sidelines, waiting. Popular belief was that Einhorn would beat the system again. Many journalists had, in fact, prepared their headlines in advance, reading something like, "Unicorn stays in France." Up to the last minute, the Unicorn's lawyers expected what Newsweek termed a slam dunk win, and probably reassured him of this in the courtroom. A few minutes after the hearing opened inside the Palais de Justice, Einhorn was seen smiling, hugging his wife and looking confident, even as Judge Arrighi drew his attention to announce his verdict. But the Unicorn paled and his smile faded when the gist of what the judge just said began to sink in, that he favored the decision for the request of extradition. "What?" Einhorn asked, blinking, hearing but not sure if he heard correctly. "What's going on?" His lawyers didn't answer him. The courtroom came alive with flashing cameras and buzzing. Someone cheered. Reporters dashed for the foyer, already scribbling notes on their pads. The judge folded up his papers and left. The Unicorn, understanding fully now, only stared, hearing nothing else. "Hope dies hard," says an old cliché. And right or wrong, Einhorn still had hope. Prime Minister Lionel Jospin still needed to concur with the ruling. And if he did, there was still a possibility that the Conseil d'État, the highest appeals court in the land, would not. The extradition dossier, compiled on May 27th, has been mislaid. The papers were to have been signed by the consenting Prime Minister of France within 2 weeks of the hearing. Without that signature, Einhorn cannot be returned to the U.S. to stand trial. But according to a website called Holly Leaves, which monitored a list of up-to-the-minute clippings dedicated to the life and death of Holly Maddux, his office says they have no such file. Where it went, was it ever really sent? What happened to it? These are anyone's guess. If this act is ever done, the site read, then there is an appeal to the Conseil d'État. Meanwhile, Einhorn remains at liberty. His stay in France could be indefinite. To quote a popular tune from the days when the Unicorn might have still made love, not war, the beat goes on. In the meantime, the Maddux family has experienced some closure to their pain, symbolic if nothing else. On July 28, 1999, a civil jury awarded them a settlement of $907 million in a wrongful death suit. The family did not expect to get the money, of course, and really didn't want it. All they wanted was Ira Einhorn brought back for trial. But the reward quickly takes away from him any remuneration he would earn off of book rights or through other media channels. In fact, what generated the lawsuit were rumors about Einhorn's deal-cutting with a foreign publisher. The Madduxes refused to sit by and let him get rich over this tragic matter. The civil charges consisted of wrongful death, intentional infliction of emotional distress, assault and battery, and abuse of a corpse. According to the Philadelphia Inquirer, in deliberations that took just over an hour, the 6-member jury awarded the family $752 million in punitive damages and $155 million in compensatory damages. Family members, overjoyed at the verdict, conceded they will never see the money, but they said neither will Einhorn. The trial, though victorious, wasn't without its heartbreak. The black steamer trunk that had been Holly Maddux's coffin for 18 months stood in the City Hall courtroom as a gruesome symbol of her violent death, the Inquirer continued. Jurors left their seats in the jury box to look inside the trunk while Detective Chitwood described how he pried open its padlock, pushed aside old newspapers, and found Maddux's mummified remains. "It's a little bit hard. That's the first time I have seen the trunk in person," said Meg Wakeman, one of Holly's sisters. Pointing to a large color blow-up of the victim's mummified skull showing the fractures, prosecuting attorney James E. Beardsley addressed the jury. "We want to show you the suffering and pain for punitive damages. You must know what Holly went through. We can legally attach any earnings of Einhorn or his wife. If he can spend it, we want it." And in closing, he added that the award has got to be so substantial that it will be a shot heard around the world. Both of Holly's parents are dead, her father committing self-checkout in 1988 and her mother passing away soon after. Their children, Meg, John, Elizabeth, and Mary, are carrying on and living for the day that the killer unicorn comes home in chains. "My parents died thinking that Ira had beaten them," Elizabeth explained. "Well, I want to go put some roses on my parents' graves and tell them, we got the bastard." Close to 60 now, Ira Einhorn looks like his own ghost. His dark hair has turned snow white, his biblical patriarch's beard replaced by a goatee, wrote columnist Marilyn Lois Polak. Ira Einhorn resembles nothing more than a nearly prosperous burger in a Truffaut film, wanting nothing more than to be left alone by a carnivorous international press that would chew him up alive and spit him out in little pre-measured pellets of electronic entertainment. Polak had met the unicorn in his glory days and recalls him as barrel-chested and with a bearded face, pocked, body thick with various excesses. A corrupt Buddha of a teacher fattened on the worship of uncritical student acolytes. She related a story she had heard from a friend. One afternoon, Einhorn and two colleagues were sharing a chat in Philadelphia's Kamek Baths when the subject of women arose. Someone asks Ira what he would do if Holly cheated on him. Well, Ira's eyes started bulging and his veins swelled, and he said, "Boys, mark my words, I'd kill her." Apparently, he already had. She was missing 2 months when he said that. The year 1999 may be the year Ira Einhorn comes back to tally up for what he has done. Or maybe the French appellates will decide against handing him over to barbaric America. If that's the case, then the unicorn will be scot-free to enjoy what's left of his life in the verdant hills of the wine country. But somewhere, in the shadows of the vineyards perhaps, just when he is oh so sure that forgetfulness absolves his crime, the memories of Holly Maddux may one day replay themselves in a phantasmagoria. After all, a trunk may be waiting for him, his own personal Pandora's box. On July 25, 2000, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that Ira Einhorn's 2-decade flight from justice became tenuous when French Premier Lionel Jospin signed the necessary papers to begin extradition proceedings against him. Under French law, Einhorn was given 60 days to launch an appeal, a process that was expected to take many months to resolve. Following the decision, Einhorn's lawyers were expected to launch an appeal to France's highest legal body, the Council of State, and the European Court of Human Rights. After being notified of the decision by the U.S. Justice Department, District Attorney Lynn Abraham issued the following statement. "I am happy that the process is moving forward toward his facing justice. However, given his track record, I am still concerned that he is going to flee. He has vowed never to return to Philadelphia." The paper also reported that Einhorn's legal team would assert that their client had no guarantee of a new trial if extradited to the United States, despite a Pennsylvania law that allows him to petition for one. They were also expected to argue that the Pennsylvania law is unconstitutional, as they believe it interferes with the final judgment of Einhorn's trial in absentia. Under French law, anyone convicted in absentia is entitled to a retrial. The report described how Premier Jospin agreed to sign the order only after the Pennsylvania General Assembly passed special legislation granting Einhorn the chance to petition for a new trial, and U.S. officials pledged that Einhorn would not face execution. Holly Maddux's sister, Margaret Wakeman, was in Paris when the papers were signed and later told reporters, "It's pretty exciting to hear that there's one less move that he's got. Let's see, it's been how many years? 3 since the apprehension, a year and a half since the last court decision. I guess it's about time. Time takes on a new element and a new dimension when you're in the position we're in." On September 7th, the Philadelphia Daily News reported that the French police had set up a 24-hour surveillance outside Einhorn's cottage in the south of France in case he decided to flee. 12 days later, the Philadelphia Inquirer ran a story describing how Ira Einhorn had appealed to Premier Jospin to reconsider his decision and confirmed that an appeal had been made to France's Council of State. He also told the press that he could not guarantee that he would not flee again if his final appeals failed. In response to Einhorn's comments, District Attorney Abraham said, "I don't care how long it takes. I intend to be at the airport when Ira Einhorn is brought home in chains to stand trial once again for the murder of Holly Maddux. The witnesses are not going to go away. He's not going to outfox me. I'm going to be there, and all the witnesses are going to be there. He can't outlive the witnesses either. He'll never be able to outlive the dead body, the trunk, and the key to his locked closet in his apartment." On October 7th, the Philadelphia Daily News reported that Premier Jospin had affirmed his decision to extradite the convicted killer to the United States, denying Einhorn's request that he reconsider the matter. In response, District Attorney Abraham told a press conference, "This must make Ira Einhorn so nervous, which is good. He must know he will ultimately lose this fight." Abraham also stated that the French government had denied her request to take Einhorn into custody. "He is a severe risk of flight," she said. "He has said he has no intention of going back to the United States." On December 4th, the Philadelphia Daily News reported that Einhorn's lawyers had filed their appeal to the French Council of State. Just 8 days later, the lawyers received their decision. France's highest legal body had rejected all of their arguments, clearing the way for Einhorn's extradition, pending the final appeal before the European Court of Rights. After hearing the news, Einhorn allegedly cut his neck with a knife and was hospitalized. His wife later declared that this apparent act of desperation was, in fact, a political act. On July 19, 2001, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported that the European Court on Human Rights had announced it did not oppose the return of Einhorn to the USA. Finally, after 20 years on the run, Ira Einhorn had run out of options. On July 21, 2001, just 2 days after the decision, a court TV report described how Einhorn, shackled and wearing a bulletproof vest, was returned to the U.S., arriving at Philadelphia International Airport at around 4 a.m. under armed guard just hours after being taken into custody at his home in France. The report also detailed that having already been convicted in absentia, he will now be tried again to satisfy a French requirement that foreign nationals not be extradited based on trials in absentia. The report also carried a comment from Elizabeth Buffy Hall, Holly Maddux's sister. "I hope this has actually wiped that smirk off his face that we've had to look at for 4 years, and I'm sure he'll enjoy his stay in the Pennsylvania penal system. It's our time to smirk." During the 8-hour flight, 3 deputy U.S. Marshals, an FBI agent, a Philadelphia homicide detective, and a physician accompanied Einhorn, the court TV report said. After his arrival, Einhorn was taken to a federal courthouse before being transferred to a maximum security state prison near Philadelphia. District Attorney Lynn Abraham had the final word. "This is very satisfying because we've waited so long and worked so hard. This is the beginning, not the end." Associated Press reported that just before Holly's death, she was happier than she had been in years. That is, according to Buffy Hall, the sister of Holly Maddux, who testified that the last time she saw Maddux alive, her sister seemed excited and upbeat, and said she was about to leave Ira Einhorn. In seeming contrast, Stephen F. Einhorn, 58, Ira's only sibling, said his brother was the most gentle person in the world who protected him from bullies during their boyhood. He loved her. He wanted to marry her, said the younger Einhorn, who lived in suburban Glenside with their 91-year-old mother. Lawyer for the former hippie guru said Ira Einhorn did not kill his girlfriend more than 20 years ago, and he fled the country only because he was plain scared. As opening statements in Einhorn's murder trial began, prosecutor Joel Rosen said he had a history of violence against women, reading a poem from Einhorn's personal journals, in which the defendant allegedly described how he had beaten and choked another ex-lover. The poem's closing lines were, "In such violence, there may be freedom." He had his own little bizarre philosophy of violence. It was okay to him, Rosen said. Maddux's 3 sisters and her brother were in the gallery. "This, to me, is the final chapter. It's here," one of the sisters, Buffy Hall, said. "We trusted the system would work, and it ultimately did, even against astronomical odds." The jury was chosen in just a few days, quicker than expected. Lawyers on both sides had thought the media frenzy that has surrounded Einhorn would make it hard to find people without an opinion on the case. Einhorn's lawyers may call celebrities such as Ellen Burstyn and Peter Gabriel as character witnesses. His New Age philosophy had gained him a following among the rich and influential in the 1970s. On August 6, 2002, Einhorn's lawyers argued that the new murder trial that was the basis of Einhorn's extradition from France would be unconstitutional. Their main objections centered around a Pennsylvania law that was passed specifically to allow Einhorn's retrial, which they say violates his protection against double jeopardy, or being tried twice for the same crime. During the prosecution's opening statements in September 2002, Assistant District Attorney Joel Rosen told jurors that he had the smoking gun that he believed would prove Einhorn's guilt. Moreover, he promised to show jurors the trunk which contained Maddux's body, describing it as the most powerful physical evidence you could possibly have in a case. The evidence proved to be very powerful indeed. That December, the prosecution followed through on their promise when they presented to jurors huge photographs depicting the trunk where Maddux's mummified remains were found. The trunk had been surrounded by foam pellets and newspaper dated September 15, 1977. It was clear she was stuffed into the chest soon after death because her body was frozen in a position that fit its contours. Moreover, the dated newspapers further supported his theory, which was dated just 4 days after she was last seen alive. Some former friends of Maddux also gave evidence at the trial. They testified about the telltale marks and bruises they observed on their friend in the years before she vanished in 1977, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported. The prosecution suggested that Einhorn was not only abusive on a regular basis, but turned murderous shortly after he learned that Maddux met another man, which was believed to have been the primary motive. Afterwards, they further suggested that he tried to cover his tracks by hiding her body. And when his crime was discovered, he fled not out of fear, but because of guilt. The evidence against Einhorn was just too strong, and he knew it. So did the jury, who found him guilty of first-degree murder in December 2002. Einhorn's story, which primarily blamed the government for framing him because of psychic control research he conducted in the 1960s, just didn't hold water. Maddux's siblings were pleasantly surprised about the jury's decision, especially after fighting so hard to get Einhorn extradited to America after fleeing to Europe some 20 years earlier. Their happiness was further compounded when they learned that he would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His new home was now Houtsdale Prison. On April 3, 2020, Einhorn died of natural causes in the Pennsylvania SCI Laurel Highlands. He was 79 years old.